let's talk about how to read The Scarlet Letter. Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter, is a true American classic. Everyone ought to read this novel at some point, if for no other reason than that it encompasses two important periods in American history. The first is the period that Hawthorne is actually writing about in The Scarlet Letter, which he identifies as sometime before the close of the 17th century. So in other words, this is pre-revolutionary colonial America at the time of the Puritans, and the novel is set in New England in a Puritan colony. But Hawthorne is writing also about the mid-19th century, 1850 to be exact, which is the date of the publication of the novel. So even though, in a sense, this is historical fiction, it's also telling us a little bit about the time period in which it was written. Hawthorne was particularly interested in, and one might even say obsessed by, the Puritans, because one of his ancestors, John Hawthorne, was one of the judges during the Salem witch trials of 1692. Nathaniel Hawthorne was really disturbed by the role that his ancestor had played in sending 20 people to their death on charges of witchcraft. So he often played out this interest in the Puritans in his writing, most notably in The Scarlet Letter, but also in some of his short fiction, including the very famous story Young Goodman Brown. Hawthorne, of course, was writing about the Puritans as historical fiction. He was looking back at that time period from a remove of almost 200 years. So in the mid-19th century, when he was writing The Scarlet Letter, of course there were other influences on the novel. One of the most interesting is the fact that 2 years earlier, in 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention was held, at which a group of women got together and wrote their own Declaration of Independence. That convention is often cited as the beginning of the women's movement. So Hawthorne appears to have been, at least to some extent, thinking about Seneca Falls and influenced by it in creating his protagonist in The Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne. One of the challenges of reading The Scarlet Letter is that it begins with a long introductory section called The Custom House. This is a piece that Hawthorne considered to be a sketch, and it tells the story, much of it autobiographical, about Hawthorne's time working at the Salem Custom House, where he was keeping the record of ships coming in and out of the Salem harbor. It seems to have a fairly limited connection to the novel, the rest of the novel, The Scarlet Letter. And in fact, Hawthorne himself admitted that he probably could have cut this sketch out and it wouldn't have harmed the novel any. But the sketch is in there to provide a little bit of a frame for the story. So at some point, it takes a fictional turn, and he claims to have found a scarlet letter and a foolscap document that tells the story of Hester Prynne in the attic of the Custom House. So this is his fictional excuse for giving his story credibility. And it's not an unusual 19th century device, although the 44 pages it takes for this sketch are sometimes daunting to an unsuspecting reader. Don't let that slow you down, and in fact, it wouldn't be horrible for you to skip the sketch and jump right to chapter 1 if that's what your book club wants to do. The story of The Scarlet Letter itself is not that difficult to follow. It's pretty straightforward in its chronology, and if you are accustomed to reading 19th century prose, you probably won't have any difficulty with the novel itself. There are a few things, though, that I'll suggest that might be interesting to think about as you're reading The Scarlet Letter. One of them is simply to pay attention to the character of Hester and also to her daughter Pearl, thinking about how Hawthorne might be positioning these women, what he might be thinking about them. In essence, asking yourself to what extent you can do a feminist reading of this novel, and to what extent it's actually following very traditional ideas about women. To what extent is Hester a Puritan woman, and to what extent is she a 19th century woman, maybe on the cusp of a new era in women's rights. Another thing to pay attention to in the novel is Hawthorne's use of the natural world, all of the imagery surrounding the forest, and water and the sunshine. Anytime the natural world is mentioned, think about how Hawthorne is using it symbolically, because it's often serving a symbolic purpose. You might also want to think about how the Scarlet Letter has influenced our culture today. You often find references to it in popular culture. It comes up over and over again, and interestingly, only a couple of movie versions have been made of it. I definitely would not recommend the Demi Moore version. It's really terrible in terms of changing the ending for Hollywood purposes. So nobody has really made a great movie version of the Scarlet Letter, and it's kind of curious to ask why and to think about what role this story has played in our culture and how it might work as a film today. Hawthorne was a true romantic of his time period, romantic with a capital R, as in the Romantic period of literature. And there are also Gothic elements to this novel. Those are two terms that you might want to look up and learn a little bit more about before you read the novel as well. The Scarlet Letter is a great pick for your book club if you're interested in reading a classic. I hope you'll give it a try, and let us know in the comments below what you thought of it. Read on!